This is Reynolds Podcast, The Creative Mindset.
Welcome to The Creative Mindset, a podcast about the art of building a career through conversations with the world's leading practitioners of creativity. It's an intimate journey on how they got started, their turning points, failures, and tips on work and life. I am your host, Rei Inamoto, the founding partner of I & Co., a global innovation firm based in New York and Tokyo. Today's episode is part one of my conversation with Paola Antonelli, the senior curator of design at the Museum of Modern Art. The reason why I reached out to Paola for the recording of this podcast was because over the years, over more than 20 years that I've lived in New York, and I've seen multiple exhibitions at multiple museums, but the exhibitions that she curated over the years seem to have more creativity in them. The topics, the subject matters that she would choose for her shows, and the way she curates those shows were fresh, surprising, and inspiring. And I wanted to understand the source of creativity for her work in the world of design exhibitions and how she got to where she got to. In the end, she gives us a piece of advice about life, which was quite surprising. So take a listen and hope that becomes a useful tip for your work and life. So let's get started. I never really knew how a curator becomes a curator, and wanted to, and I'm sure everybody has their own journey, but I wanted to hear about your journey, how you got interested in this line of work in the first place. And if you can tell us a little bit about your journey becoming a curator.
See, that's the problem. I have a feeling that I never decided. I have a feeling that I never decided anything in my life except once when I decided to abandon economics school and move to architecture. But I truly did not have a calling. I grew up in Milan, and as a Milanese kid, I went through everything that Milan has to offer because I worked in the fashion world. When I was a teenager, I was keeping the press separate from the buyers at Armani's PR office. So, I mean, I was like like an intern, right? But an intern for like 3 years every afternoon. So I was working there. Then I worked in design. I worked, it's like all of the different things that Milan had to offer, I did. But before becoming a curator, I never thought that I would become a curator. So I studied economics at first. And after 2 years of studying economics, I realized that I was really unhappy. And it took me 2 years because I was stubborn. I wanted to really make it work. So I remember that I was in Sardinia, which is the place where I was born. And I was sitting on a rock and I was thinking and looking at the sea. And that's when I decided to move from economics to architecture. So that's what I did, not because I wanted to become an architect, but because I wanted to go as far away from economics as possible. And at that time, architecture school in Milan was a mess. It was like we were 15,000 students, only in architecture, only in Milan, 15,000. We would pay $200 a year. And it was a jungle. It was like, everybody had like a knife between their teeth and off you went. Like it was, I didn't even know what I was doing. I just was finally free from the Bocconi, which was the University of Economics that I used to go to, which was very square. And I couldn't really cope with that. So I didn't really know what I was doing, but I started architecture. And since I've always been an overachiever, I just did it well. You know what I'm saying? Even in the middle of that chaos, right? So, then I was recruited when I was still in school to hang an exhibition at the Triennale. And when I was there hanging the paintings and painting the walls and doing everything, I met the curator of the exhibition. He was Vittorio Magnago Lampugnani is his name. He was also the deputy editor of Domus, the magazine, right? And so he hired me at Domus, and everything happened. In Italy, you don't study to be a curator. or to be a journalist, or to be, like one particular practice. You study a subject, and then you write about it, you curate it, you just like edit it. And that makes for deep knowledge and sometimes not so great form, but you just like acquire it as you go. And that's what happened to me. I started freelance curating, I started writing, I started reporting. And to me, journalism and curating go together. The kind of curating that I do is of that time. I just want to stop for a second, otherwise I go on forever. I can start talking about the United States and what happened.
Yeah. So just to focus a little bit on specifically in your on your career, what was your from studying architecture to finding an opportunity to curate a show? Well, tell us a little bit about that moment in your life.
It's just being in the right place at the right time, I guess, or just being in the right place, period. Because even today, for anybody that's curating design, Milan offers many more opportunities than, say, New York, right? So I feel that it all happened quite fluidly. I mean, I was, as I mentioned to you, an overachiever. I was pretty unbearable. And actually, my colleagues used to call me the American before I had even come to the United States, because I used to be on time at the meetings. I used to be prepared, so I was the American in a kind of derogatory way. Yeah. I think it has to do with the fact that I was in Milan. In Milan, there were so many more opportunities, right? So I told you, I was at school, then I'm at the Triennale, this amazing building that was built to make exhibitions of architecture and design. I'm there hanging the show. Then I start working at Domus, which is also in Milan, and it's one of the most famous world magazines of architecture and design. And then I'm at Domus, and there's somebody that's doing an exhibition at the Lingotto, the beautiful factory in Turin. And they tell me, do I want to be a junior assistant curator? Sure. So that's how it happened. It was just really the opportunities. And I also have great mentors that gave me those opportunities. Some that I love more than others. My beloved ones are like Giulio Castelli, who was the founder of Cartel. He was this chemical engineer, and also he's the one that founded, with many others, but he founded the Salone del Mobile. So we're talking about this like amazing person. Then another great mentor is Italo Lupi, who was the art director of Domus and then became the editor-in-chief of Abitare. So he took me with him to Abitare. So many, many others. And then I had not mentors, but great encounters, like Achille Castiglioni was one. I say that he was not a mentor because he never mentored me at all, but quite the opposite. When I was at the university, he gave me like really low grades. He was not nice. He was not super nice, but he was a great designer, and I did an exhibition on him, so that was nice. And he was a great teacher. So mentors and the PR of Armani, Barbara Vitti, was also a great mentor. So important people that I met because I was such a pain in the neck overachiever, first of the class, so yeah.
I see. So just going along your career, tell us a little bit about what you consider to be a turning point. Yeah, what were some of the key turning points in your career?
Well, the turning point that I told you, the first one was like that rock in Sardinia, for sure. Then turning points, maybe when I got, I was working in Milan at Domus, etc., and I was asked if I wanted to be the Italy coordinator for the 1989 edition of the International Design Conference in Aspen. It was supposed to be about Italy, right? And I said, yes, of course. I told you, overachiever, like, yeah, please. Until that moment, I had done wonderful things, but in a very provincial way, in the sense that it was still about Italian excellence. It was about, just all these different things. And I didn't really know how to be a professional, say, in the United States. I didn't know how to write a proper memo. I didn't know how to ride in a blue car with a telephone, just all these different things, right? And all of a sudden, I remember it was just like a different level, a different plane of work. So I decided that I had a crush on the audiovisuals guy, who was this surfer from Malibu, right? And it's not really true that I had a crush. I realize now in hindsight, I just needed this kind of like emotional excuse to just like keep going. And so the conference was in June, and in August, I went to LA because I was, I decided I was infatuated with this guy. Nothing ever happened with him because he couldn't care less about me. But you know what? I got a teaching position at UCLA.
Oh, excellent. So then from teaching in LA, at UCLA, what's next?
So when I was teaching in LA, as I mentioned, I was also in Milan. I was stopping in New York, and I had a boyfriend in San Francisco. And I remember literally opening ID Magazine. ID Magazine, the industrial design magazine. So not the cool ID magazine from the UK, the American version, also very cool. And there was the ad for the position at MoMA. So I answered the ad, and I knew the curator there, the chief curator, because I had written about some of the exhibition, but he was very surprised because he didn't think of me as a curator. That was Terry Riley, right? So I applied and interviewed, and I got the job.
Wow. So like literally from a magazine, just a posting in a magazine that you responded to. So it's not like they headhunted you from UCLA. Yeah.
No, if they had hunted me, I was not at all. They usually recruited people, especially at that level, because it was an associate curator position. It was not like a curatorial assistant. So usually people at that level have museum experience, and they usually recruit them by looking at other museums. And instead, I don't even have a PhD. I mean, I have a master's, and I was doing freelance exhibitions, but I was not necessarily on their radar.
Wow. So you quite literally manually.
But then, the terrible thing is when they told me that I had the job, then I had to move to New York, and there was a little bit of a trauma. But okay.
But when you say trauma, is it because you had you had a relationship on the West Coast and moving to New York? Is that kind of trauma, or what do you mean by trauma?
No, not only that. I mean, that's definitely, those are always things that tear you a little bit inside. And my family was in Milan. No, but it was also that I moved here in February of 1994. And that was a notorious winter. There were like 17 snowstorms. It was cold. My God, it was so cold. And it was not only cold, the weather, it was also at MoMA, people were cold, or at least I felt that way. I mean, New York is not a super easy place at the beginning. So, we froze. No, I can still go. So New York is not a super easy place at the beginning. And I have to say that even though Terry was fantastic, he was not really the mentoring type. And at the beginning, I really was going to cry in the bathroom. I was feeling really, really lonely. Also, my colleagues did not welcome me very much. They were like, especially one person who I have, like, I'm Italian, so I'm still tasting my revenge because their life is not going so well. But but so it was really difficult.
Wow! So your introduction to New York and MoMA was a little rocky emotionally. Wow!
I don't think it was at the beginning, but I went through a really serious depression. But still, I was working. I mean, like, the emotional state doesn't really matter. When you have to work, you have to work, and you work. So as a working professional, I was always at the top of my game. And being depressed or down meant that maybe it took me a half hour or 1 hour to get going in the morning, right? So there were moments in which I was like crying. And then I would put myself in front of the computer, and in a half hour I would stop crying and just work for the whole day. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like a functional alcoholic. I know that there's many, and I don't know how openly people talk about them, but depression is a reality, and it's my family, and I know that it's a problem that I have. I mean, right now I don't have it anymore. For an afternoon perhaps, right? And I recognize it. So when you know it, you know how to handle it. But at the beginning, you need to learn to deal with it. So you just go through life. Life is not easy for anyone. So
yeah. Well, thanks for sharing your personal side of the story that I never knew, and I'm glad that you had something to focus on professionally to get through. So I guess coming to New York in the 90s, even though your initial introduction, it was cold and you had some challenges, but at the same time you were comfortable being in a foreign environment that you weren't familiar with.
Super happy. And after the first year and a half, when I started feeling really that it was my home, I don't think that I've ever encountered as beautiful people as New Yorkers, just with their own personality. When people ask me what's my favorite place in New York, I think I was asked by some magazine, and I had them actually take pictures of me on the subway. I just love New Yorkers on the subway, because they have such strong personalities. And also they're so kind to each other. We're so kind to each other, maybe because life is complicated, especially when you're thrown together like sardines. And we learned to cope with each other by being kind. And it became even more evident after 9/11. After 9/11, people started, really being so loving to each other.
Yeah. It's the level of diversity and the level of different types of people and still coexisting that I find fascinating. What piece of advice do you have to a 22-year-old self, to a Paola in your early 20s when you were starting your career? What advice do you have to yourself?
Learn how to surf. Because of what I was telling you, because I think it's the best approach towards life. Because I feel that it gives you a different approach to life. I feel that it's a great metaphor, but it must be also an amazing way to make that metaphor reality. And I wish that I could teach it to everybody. But you were saying, which advice would I give to myself, not to somebody else, right? To myself, I wouldn't change a thing. I would tell myself to keep going. You're beautiful, you're smart, you are doing just well. For the 31 years old myself is hanging there, really, trust your friends and value them, because the tough times are always happening, so you need to have a buffer around you. Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. That was part one of my conversation with Paola Antonelli, the senior curator of design at the Museum of Modern Art. I had, as usual, 3 takeaways from my conversation with her. Those points were: number 1, opportunity is a consequence of where you are. Number 2, depression is reality. Number 3, learn how to surf. The first takeaway, opportunity is a consequence of where you are. In this conversation, she shared her upbringing as well as how she got into fashion, then writing about design, and that's how she found her way into the world of curation. She is from Italy, but specifically, she grew up in Milano, and she talked about being not just at the right time, but at the right place, the importance of being in the right place. And that really made me think that the place where you bring yourself to, whether it's a city or company that you go work for, and people that you surround yourself with, that becomes a key to opening the next opportunity. In her case, because she lived and grew up in Milano, she had more exposure to different types of design, and she cited those exposures as a way for her to eventually find her way into the world of curation. So number one, opportunity is a consequence of where you are. The second takeaway, which I have to admit was a little surprising, but I was deeply appreciative of her being open to talk about her own struggle with depression. She said that especially when she first moved to New York, and this was in the early 90s, she was, obviously much younger than she is now. She didn't know a lot of people in New York, and, New Yorkers are notorious for being tough and potentially rough. She didn't necessarily have a warm welcome. It happened to be a very, very cold winter. So she felt alone. She wasn't famous or successful yet. And she found herself being quite depressed. But I was struck with the fact that she talked about it as if it was a normal thing. And it is a normal thing. These days that more visible, famous, especially athletes, have come forward in talking about their depression or their struggle with mental health, especially, performing at the highest level in the public eye. But some of them becoming very open about talking about their mental health. And I really, really appreciated Paola being open to talking about it and just explaining the struggles that she's had and how she dealt with it. And it's totally normal to have some challenges with your mental health. And it's something that a lot of people go through, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. So number two, depression is reality. Number three, learn how to surf. This was her life advice to us. She said this in a literal and metaphorical way. She said that this is a piece of advice for life. By learning literally how to surf, especially if you haven't done it, it's something new that you may not be familiar with or comfortable with, and it will take a while for you to get used to. But once you know how to ride the wave, it becomes much, much easier to maneuver from one wave to the next wave. And she gave this advice as a metaphor for life as well, because life has different waves at different times. And you really have to try to learn how to ride those waves in order to move from one place to the next place. And I thought that was a really unusual but a refreshing take on how to navigate life. So takeaway number three, learn how to surf in life and for real. So just to summarize, three takeaways from my conversation with Paola Antonelli. Number one, opportunity is a consequence of where you are. Number two, depression is reality. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And number three, learn how to surf in life and for real. The next episode will be the second part of my conversation with Paola Antonelli, where she talks about the definition of creativity, which again, in her own way, was very refreshing and a little surprising, but very Paola. Stay tuned. I'm your host, Ray Namoto, and this is The Creative Mindset. See you next time.